Tonight, we bring you another conversation in our series, Race Matters Solutions, during a week when racial tensions on campus have led to protests and high-profile resignations. Special correspondent Charlene Hunter-Gault sat down with Columbia University Teachers College professor Daryl Sue to learn more about the small slights that some say are more insidious than the overt racial tensions that could be seen and observed by all. Here's that conversation.
Professor Sue, thank you for joining us. So tell me just what exactly is microaggression?
Well, microaggressions are varying from being conscious, deliberate on a continuum to being outside one's level of awareness and unintentional. Microaggressions really are reflections of worldviews of inclusion, exclusion, superiority, inferiority, and they come out in ways that are outside the level of conscious awareness of an individual. When I'm asked, where were you born? And I say, I was born in Portland, Oregon. And they persist by saying, no, where were you really born? And I'll say, Portland, Oregon? And they'll say, no, what country were you born in? And I'll say, the United States. They get very embarrassed. Now, this is an example that they are intending to make a personal connection. But the hidden communication, the true worldview, is that I am a perpetual alien or foreigner in my country. I am not a true American, because true Americans only look the following way. And that's what generates these behaviors that are microaggressions.
But you describe it as unintentional, and yet we've seen at the University of Missouri very blatant examples of racism.
You're right about that. Microaggressions vary from being conscious, deliberate, intentional, from old-fashioned racism and bias statements to the unintended consequences. And our studies do indicate that it's the hidden, unintentional forms of bias that are most damaging to people of color. And that, like at the University of Missouri, where you have people being called racial epithets or behaviors that are going on, it actually is only the tip of the iceberg. The reason why I believe students of color, faculty of color, are reacting in such a major way is that they are experiencing a climate that is hostile, that is full of microaggressions. These hate incidents on campus are triggering off this discontent, pain, and feeling of being silenced.
But there are critics of your studies and the notion even of microaggression, which they say have morphed from 1970 when it was unintentional to now everything that happens, and that people are just being overly sensitive. They say if you coddle these students on campus, how does that prepare them to live in the real world?
You know, the problem is that people believe microaggressions are very similar to the everyday incivility and rudeness that individuals, white Americans, experience in their day-to-day lives. They are quite different. Microaggressions for people of color are constant, continual, and cumulative. They occur to people of color from the moment of birth to when they die. And as a result, any one microaggression in isolation may represent the feather that breaks the camel's back. And people who don't see the lived experience of people of color and the daily onslaught that they experience tend not to believe that it's a major event.
You know, there's another criticism because this has been called, some of the things that people are called, now they say the N-word and other things like that, is hate speech, and that it's protected by the First Amendment. So isn't that okay, given that kind of reasoning?
You know, and I think that people who say that we are preventing individuals from free speech don't realize, ironically, that it is people of color that historically have not been able to express themselves openly or freely without punitive actions being directed at them. And so there has to be this balance, but at the same time an understanding that there are limits to free speech when it harms and hurts people.
Why do you think that students commit microaggressions, or adults for that matter?
You know, that's a good question, and I think it goes to the heart of the matter, that none of us are immune from inheriting the racial biases of our forebears. We have, attitudes and biases that are delivered through microaggressions.
But when some of these microaggressions come out in the form of real hatred, is that solvable?
We can deal with that deliberately, but the subtle forms of microaggressions are hard to prove, hard to quantify in some way, and very difficult for us to take actions against, because people oftentimes don't perceive it as harmful and significant. You know, people oftentimes tell me that white Americans are the enemy. I say, no, white Americans aren't the enemy. White supremacy is. It's the social conditioning of the superiority of one group over another. And many white Americans are equally victimized because they have been socialized into a society that tends to imbue them with these images that they believe in, but it's no fault of their own. If you really reach white Americans, they can become valuable allies. One of the reasons why our research concentrates on the unintentional forms of microaggressions is very much what Maya Angelou said. It's the unintentional bias that does the greatest harm to people of color. And I oftentimes use the example that, you know, when you look at the disparities and inequities we have in education, employment, and healthcare, it is not due to the overt racists or the white supremacists. It is due to the well-intentioned teachers who educate our children, employers who decide who to hire, who to retain, and who to promote. And it is those individuals who are unaware of their hidden biases that are having the major impact on our standard of living.
Well, Professor Su, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you.
And you can find more about microaggressions, including a video made by Professor Su explaining how they have impacted his life, on the Race Matters section of our website. That's pbs.org/newshour.